Last time
on Dragon Ball Z,
we discovered a secret feature in the Gen 2 games that could potentially derail the algorithm theory. The debug menu. But things aren't as simple moving on to Generation 3 on the Game Boy Advance, since every Pokemon now has around 15 unique colors. And again, each one of these colors have specific settings on the 3 sliders of blue, red, and green respectively. So with this many colors, wouldn't it just be easier to make an algorithm for the shinies? Well, you have to keep in mind that although these colors can all be unique, usually at least 6 are just slightly different shades of the main and secondary, and sometimes even the third color, while others are blacks, whites, and grays. And the same color with different shades usually change to the same shiny color with their respective HSP differences, so technically just a slightly more complex way of splitting up around 3 main colors of a Pokemon. But regardless, it's still much more complicated and would take way too long to change all these sliders by hand. So does this generation have any evidence suggesting that they used an algorithm? Yes, and a lot more than the previous gen. First off, unlike Gen 2 where Pokemon in the same evolution line that shared the same normal colors had a habit of turning into different shiny colors, Gen 3 almost always follows its evolution's shiny change if it shares the same normal color, with a few exceptions here and there. This already suggests that they wanted to keep things simple and organized like in the Gen 2 beta sprite shiny colors, and so many similarly colored Pokemon followed the same color harmony rule changes. Many Pokemon turn their triad colors like blue to pinky purple and vice versa. Pinks to golds happen a few times, and so do blues to gold, since these 3 colors are all a part of the same triad. Even when their saturations are turned way down, it still happens. And for some reason, so many blues turn green/turquoise, and if the Pokemon has red as its secondary color, it always gets a hue shift to orange. The blue to green doesn't really have a color harmony rule other than the square option and it being a triad to deeper blues, but either way, it's still undeniably a pattern. And on that note, so many oranges and reds get turned into yellows and vice versa, even as secondary colors. Another reoccurring hue change. Blues become their inverted reds and vice versa, and once again, grass types also get that autumn shiny pattern like in Gen 2. Another new pattern is blacks and dark grays love to get a hue change to light cyan or blue and vice versa, or interestingly, to reds and hot pinks as well. Other than that, the remaining Pokemon just get HSB changes that don't have any real meaning, or at least not that I found reoccurring enough to be considered a real pattern. Like oranges to greens, which is a triad, other complementary color swaps, or Pokemon turning their secondary colors triad. Like Wurmple's red turning its yellow colors triad purple, though that doesn't explain why Zangoose's red claws turn purple when having no yellow on its sprite. Seviper's red stripe and Rosella's red rose turn purple too, and we have 3 cases of whites turning gold for whatever reason. But this could be me stretching to find a pattern, since it's unrealistic to think an entire Pokemon line would use 3 different color harmony rules to get their respective shinies. But before we analyze what all these patterns mean, we have to look at where the shinies from Gen 1 and 2 fit into this, since they're not restricted to 2 colors anymore. Most of them actually kept their original shinies but with just updated colors. Even in the smaller details like Totodile being lighter than its other forms, same with the Squirtle line, Alakazam's saturation difference is still there, Jumpluff's lighter pink to its previous forms, Drowsy's darker pink, Muck's slightly more saturated green, Gengar's red to and much more, but I think you get the idea. Most stay the same. And if they used an algorithm for this gen, they would have also followed the same patterns. But some colors weren't changed entirely but were given a similar hue or just a bit of a cleanup, while others ditched the old version in place of some newer patterns like Snorlax, Unknown, and the Houndoom line now doing the same dark grey to light blue just like the Gen 3 Pokemon. Or they become already existing patterns like the Omanyte line losing their black to become the generic blue to purple triad rule, while others get a complete color revamp with no real pattern involved, like Ponyta getting a blue flame and Rapidash getting a smoky color. Magcargo loses its blue flame and becomes purple, but its shell goes from grey to dark red, which could be the Gen 3 pattern. Charizard's purple and green become black and red, Skarmory keeps its green feathers but changes from silver to gold, Blossom goes from blue to purple, Coughing and Swinub's deep blue both get changed to a lighter pale blue, and etc. So other than the new pattern of black to dark blue, the Gen 1 and 2 shinies don't really have any correlation to the newer Gen's patterns since most of them stayed the same, so I think it's safe to say that they were most probably done completely by hand in this gen. But then what about Gen 3's Pokemon? Well, its patterns are much more coherent than the previous gens. In fact, it was the easiest gen to identify and apply patterns to out of all the other gens in the study. And it's also easier to implement an algorithm to apply all these shiny patterns and changes, especially with this much of an increase to colors. There's no way they would have went in and changed every single individual color slider by hand, right? Well, I don't think they did, at least not for the majority of Pokemon. You see, there's still a few unanswered questions about this hypothetical algorithm when we take a look at a few small details and the unexplainable shiny changes. Like, why does Rayquaza lose its main green color and turn completely black, which can't be changed to other hues on the Photoshop tool because of its complete loss of coloration, just like Sludgema from Gen 2. Or why the Regis all get a random HSB shift, why the Metagross line goes from blue to white and its secondary white to yellow, which is the only Pokemon that does this exact color change. And why does Torchic and Combusken's shiny share the same color pattern even though their base form's primary colors are in opposite places? It's like the whole family line gets the same color change rule, albeit with a few HSB differences per Evo. The more I looked into this, I realized that although Pokemon have these patterns mentioned above across multiple evolution lines, there are also times where a Pokemon family applies a general rule even when one form doesn't share the same base color. Marshtomp shares a very close purple to its other forms even though its base color is a much lighter blue. Same story with Grovyle in its evolution line. Shelgon isn't even blue but gets this other form's green shade, and there's a few other examples, but either way, if this was an algorithm, wouldn't it change all Pokemon into the assigned patterns with their respective shades and lighting like in the Shuppet line? But for Pokemon like Wailord and Wailmer, although they follow the blue to purple triad rule, they share the same purple even when their base blues aren't the same. And their secondary color doesn't change at all for some reason. The Walrein line's the same. Different shades of blue for normal sprites, but the same if not very similar shades of purple for the shiny. Wurmple and Beautifly get the same purple and gold despite having different base colors, and Nincada and Ninjask again share a gold shiny when having mostly different base colors. Shout out to Alpha Curemonn and Voliol for helping me get these color palette pictures. They helped so much, so give them a big thanks in the comments too. The fact that there are cases that do follow an appropriate color change and others that don't, along with just strange unexplainable changes, allude to each shiny change being applied by hand, albeit in groups of whole Pokemon families at times. Proof of this is Latias and Latios. They both follow the blue to green / turquoise rule accompanied with the red to orange hue change discussed earlier, but their colors are just in opposite order. Though Latias is the only Pokemon that breaks this rule by changing its blue to a slightly lighter blue. We know this is a mistake because in future games, they fixed Latias by making it green, which followed the pattern we originally identified it with. So what most likely happened was that for the majority of Pokemon, they decided to make each shiny change in the same way, even in some cases where they weren't the exact same base color, which would have been as easy as just copying and pasting each color palette settings onto another Pokemon and just readjusting them to their respective color squares if need be. They must have had a few different color patterns in mind, either inspired from the color harmony rules or just playing around with the color sliders. And why some Pokemon share the same color change and others with a slight HSB difference is probably because the developers didn't have enough time to manually edit each one and or felt that the same color change worked well enough, so they just left it. I mean, they wouldn't want all their shinies to look the exact same, which is why you also get some Pokemon doing strange changes or actually having different primary or secondary color changes while still keeping the same theme. Now, this can be explained by an algorithm which created these patterns we see and the devs doing touch-ups after the fact, but I think the evidence heavily suggests them creating a shiny change and copying it for the rest of a Pokemon's line with slight HSB changes here and there, and or sometimes being the exact same. But Gens 4 and 5 are on the Nintendo DS, which has an even higher color range, so what does this mean for the Pokemon sprites and their shinies? Find out in part 3.